My name is Jennifer Oates. I'm here from Eden's Counseling Group, Montrose location. This is my office. And I'm your presenter today on our Focus on Wellness webinar, which is related to motivation and solution-focused thinking. I'm a licensed professional counselor associate, and my supervisor is Heather Murphy. She's a licensed professional counselor supervisor. So today, this presentation of the series, this Focus on Wellness series, is part of a monthly series of presentations delivered by the therapists at Eden's Counseling Group. These webinars are always free and they're always delivered virtually. And participants include current clients of the practice who are invited via our email listserv, members of the general community, and other therapists. And we presented on pretty much anything that you would ever want to know about, from couples communication strategies to parenting, to grief, symptoms of anxiety, pretty much all of those kinds of things. And so you can access any of our past presentations by going on to the Eden's Counseling Group website, as well as signing. So you can access past presentations on our resources tab, as well as sign up to attend upcoming presentations, maybe how you signed up for today. And today's webinar is being recorded. It's going to be sent to everybody who signed up to come live, just in case not everyone could make it, or perhaps that you guys attending live want to go back and look at parts of the presentation that were interesting to you, or you'd like to review, or anything like that. And so you also are going to be invited to submit feedback on today's presentation. And so Marcus, who is our administrator, he's the Eden's tree, is putting a link in the chat to our feedback form so that you can give us some feedback on how today's presentation goes before you sign off for the evening. And so today's objectives are pretty much, they're pretty small when we look at them like this, but they're kind of big when we look at them in a larger scale. We're looking to shift your mindset from problems to solutions today, learn what it takes to reignite motivation, even in difficult circumstances. Sometimes it's hard enough in regular circumstances, but we're going to look at difficult especially, and use the SMART goal framework to build a roadmap for success so you can feel confident in meeting goals in the future. And I will say that some of the material I'm covering is a little ambiguous, since these are kind of some big goals. I also will tie a bunch of the material into acceptance-based thinking, which, if you're familiar with mindfulness or acceptance commitment therapy ACT, for those therapists who are joining us tonight. And so I cover this hour's worth of information over multiple sessions with clients. And so I'm trying to cram as much of it as possible into this time for you guys. With all that said, please let me know if something gets confusing or you need clarification on it, or of an example or an idea. The easiest way to do that is going to be to put a question in the chat box, and Marcus will nicely interrupt me to let me know that there is a question. I'm really passionate about this, about the intricacies of motivation, and I'm really looking forward to talking more about it with you guys tonight. So first of all, we'll start with a definition. Some of you may have even looked this up in advance of the webinar, but what is solution-focused thinking in itself? And the easiest way to encapsulate that definition, I think, is to say that it's thinking that considers strengths and exceptions to a problem instead of fixating on the problem itself and where it came from. So when we think about problem-based thinking, problem-focused thinking, which is kind of how psychotherapy, psychiatry, and psychology have typically been conducted and evolved up until about the last 3 decades, it tends to feel more natural when we're thinking about issues that we have to consider problems and barriers rather than naturally what our solutions and strengths are. A good example is our medical system, which is very problem-focused and treatment-focused instead of preventative. And so when in this example that I wrote, I tried to encapsulate that as clearly as possible. So this first example of problem-focused thinking, I've been depressed my whole life, and I just can't imagine feeling any other way. the related feeling when you hear that or say that is probably defeated. I can't imagine any other way. It's been this way forever. I don't really know what to do about that. You may be hearing that as a therapist or hearing that as a client, or feeling that yourself and like, oh, I don't know what to do about that. But when we look at it from a solution-focused thinking perspective, we think, you've been depressed your whole life. I kind of am writing this as a therapist response to a client telling me the first sentence, but you still found ways to get up each day and keep on living, keep on doing what you're doing. And how did you do that? And the hope would be that the feeling related to that different method of thinking of you've still found ways to get up and you've still found ways to do things. How did you do that? I really want to know. I'm curious. The related feeling is typically more hopeful than defeated. Like, wow, I am resilient. I have done these things. And I do want to say that just addressing on this first example, that for some of you, solution-focused thinking might sound initially like toxic positivity, which it can become if we're not practicing it correctly. And so solution-focused thinking is actually a tenet of the positive psychology movement, but sometimes reframing our thinking into positive statements is inherently invalidating. And that's what makes it toxically positive. And we have to recognize when we've gone too far. So I'll give you examples of ones that I hear a lot, which is, well, it could be worse, or at least I don't have those problems, like comparing to somebody else. I also hear comments that like berate the person essentially for having them at all. And to say like, oh, everything's actually fine, you're just overreacting, or just focus on the positive. And I just want to draw your attention that in the example statement that I've written here, that I don't swerve from the fact that this person's lived truth is you've been depressed your whole life. That statement validates whoever this is, their lived experience, and doesn't question it. But that acknowledgement and validation does coexist with the statement, you've still found ways to carry yourself through because you're sitting with me today. And this is going to be a key element throughout the presentation that I want to encourage all of you to practice sitting with, is this idea that positive and negative don't entirely negate each other in order for solution-focused methods to be effective. It's more the mindfulness that attention, that pain can be validated and in the same breath simultaneously motivate somebody, that it helps someone believe they can make their desired changes, but also acknowledges where they've been and how they've suffered to get there. And so, how do we train our brains to think this way and do that on our own instead of have somebody correct us? The first one, which I've already kind of covered in what I was talking about in the first slide, is reframing, which is focusing on what we can do or what we do have instead of what we can't do or don't have. It's challenging our assumptions and inferences about a situation, like, oh, this performance review is going to be terrible, instead of, I've, done a good job showing up on time. And I have, like, again, focusing on what we do have, what we have done to demonstrate that we are a good employee, and that's all we can take in with us to that performance review. I think also the example I just gave in the prior slide, when it comes to emphasizing exceptions instead of the rule, is really important. So when we're working with, like that example said, maybe you're depressed all the time, or you have been your whole life, but you're still doing stuff, you're still active, you're still going places. And so, and sometimes I even ask outside of that, when was a time that you did feel happy? Maybe you were depressed most of the time, but we still encounter feelings of happiness or joy. And I wonder what was happening during those times. And so that trains us away from the problem and into that strengths-based fold of, oh, I have felt this way before, and I can access that again because I did it and didn't even know I was. In terms of removing judgment from the picture, that's very much a ACT, acceptance commitment therapy concept, mindfulness concept. When we are sitting with ourselves, like, I should do it this way, or I must do it that way. This way is wrong. Then it kind of creates this aversion to what we're trying to do because there's so much pressure on ourselves, either internally or externally, to do it a certain way. And when we're kind of clouded by that pressure on ourselves, it makes it a lot harder to follow through with solving a problem. And so if we are thinking about, and this is kind of, I don't usually use this phrase, but kind of one of those "it is what it is" kind of frames, like I'm going to do my best, or these are the tools I have and I'll use them the way that I can. Tying back into the reframe, that can help remove judgment from the picture when we're talking to ourselves about getting something done. Treating goals like an experiment is also something that I work with clients a lot to do to help stimulate motivation, because when we're thinking of goals like experiments, it helps remove the problem like one step away from ourselves. So that's when I say externalization, like sometimes when we encounter a problem, it's really easy to tie the problem to our own identity, to ourself, of like, oh, well, if I don't meet this goal, then I'm the failure, back to the judgmental thinking in the spot before. And so if we're like, oh, well, I'm just going to try to do it this way, and I'm only going to do it for a little while and see how it goes. And if I mess up, then I know I was just experimenting. It's the experiment that failed, not me. Then we take one step away from that judgment. And the last point here may seem to contradict the second point, which is, we're working with the exception. So we're looking usually back into the past when things have gone maybe the way we wanted them to or thought we wanted them to. And then this last point says, well, look to the future instead of the past. And I kind of think of that more as acceptance of what was the past story, the past struggles, and looking forward to like what could be. So an example would be like looking back and telling yourself, well, I've never been able to do this before. Like, why would it work now? I hear that one a lot from clients. And so that doesn't really allow room for the acceptance that we're in a different space now. And as much as those pieces of us are trying to warn us against messing up, if that's the only thing informing us on whether or not to try something or do it differently, then we're not even giving ourselves a chance to embrace this new place that you're at, whatever slight changes may have occurred between then and the last time a goal was set. And the biggest thing is practice these things. Like I mentioned in the first slide, these are not ways of thinking that societally we are like promoted to think like. we're promoted to think about problems and to focus on problems and to like, well, what's the problem, and not think about, well, how could I do this differently? How could I use past experiences that went well to like help this. And so practicing this as much as you can to catch these reframing opportunities, working with exceptions, removing judgment, treating things like an experiment, looking to the future, those will really help make this line of thinking a lot more inherent. And so next, I'm kind of looking at, again, more in practice, so you have more examples of what solution-focused language looks like, how to emulate it for yourselves, and see how that pushes you to feel more confident or comfortable meeting or making goals. And so one thing that I do a lot of is scaling questions with clients. So this example is, from 0 to 10, how confident are you? You'll try this at home. And why did you not say, 2 or 6 and you picked 4? Because that requires whoever I'm asking that question to consider a little more deeply. Like, I didn't just pick an arbitrary number. Like, I feel this confident or not this confident for a reason, and to examine what that reason might be a little more tangibly. I think one of my favorite things to ask clients is actually to tell me how they intentionally made their week better, with intentional being a really specific driving word. I'll ask, like, did you just wake up and the sky was blue and your problems were solved? Or did you do something to make the changes? Like, you're in a better mood today than last week. You're talking about your relationship is better. You're talking about your job is going, your relationship with your boss or your job. And how did you change that? How did you do something about that? And this usually reminds whoever I'm talking to that there is some responsibility in making the changes that they want to see, and consider that just because things, especially when they feel better, that doesn't mean that they didn't do work to get them there, or that they shouldn't continue to try to make changes to continue feeling this way. Because I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many times people have been feeling good, and then all of a sudden we're feeling bad again. And we're how did we get here? And I can't tell you how many times the person that I'm talking to has said, well, I did kind of drop off of doing this thing, or I noticed that I didn't go to church this week, or I stopped using my breathing exercises. And I'm like, oh, okay, so something changed. And now we can track that as part of how we got from A to B. And so another of my favorite questions is the how did you do that question that's on here, because this is testing for insight. I'll get I don't know, which is kind of like what I was mentioning before, like did the sky turn blue and everything get better? Because if we get I don't know, then I know that whoever it was, whatever those minute, and they can be super minute, right? We're talking about, oh, I was able to tell somebody this very specific thing and I've never told them that before, and my whole week got better, or really small things. And so it does require an enormous amount of insight and attention to self. But sometimes that means that people are just letting their life kind of happen to them. When I get an I don't know, like, oh, I don't know what changed, or like what is different for me and why it's better versus not better. And so I asked that question to force some consideration of insight. And I think this last question here touches back on judgment, and how that uproots goals faster than almost any other factor that we could discuss. If a client is or anybody is judging themselves, or someone else is, and they're perceiving that judgment, like a partner, a parent, for not achieving a goal fast enough or well enough, then the goal becomes, like I said before, tainted with this negativity and repels the client from wanting to continue to work on meeting it. And oftentimes what I'll work with people on is taking a step back from those critical parts of ourselves, or themselves, that are telling them that they can't do it or they won't be able to, because those parts have served a purpose before to protect that person, to keep them from taking risks or feeling bad, or that's a protective strategy. But it ultimately is keeping the person from making the changes that they want at this point and wherever they are, where they're trying to make change. And so I find my role is just encouraging whoever I'm talking to, and if any of my clients are on this call today or watch this later, they'll recognize me saying this, but a little change is better than no change at all, or a little awareness is better than no awareness at all, no matter how small. And that can help stifle that judgmental thinking and thought towards themselves. Oh, I'm not changing fast enough or good enough, or getting where I want to be in the way that I should, and just kind of tamping that down a little bit to say, but you are making changes, they are happening. And even if it's not the speed that you expect, it doesn't mean that it's not occurring at all. And so this is the part of the presentation where we start moving from the solution focused language, and tying that into how we harness motivation to do things. And I included a stages of change diagram here, and I apologize that it's a little blurry, but you get the idea. I included this one specifically because not every stage of change model. And for those of you who are not familiar with the stages of change model, it is primarily used to work with clients who have addiction or experience addiction. And I do work with clients who are addicted to substances, but I also use this to pretty much work on any behavior that anybody wants to change. And it has grown into that over time with more behavioral work because it is so effective. And as we look at this, the reason I chose this one is because it has a circle or a stage just dedicated to relapse or lapse, and not every stages of change model. Most of the dated ones don't include this because there was an assumption that once we reach maintenance, like maintenance is the end. You don't need to worry about this goal anymore. You're done. Like, good luck, have fun, go forth and, do your thing. But I think it's so much more like human and forgiving to include a stage just for lapse, because it's a really high bar to assume that anybody, no matter how great they are at therapy or self-work or whatever, to make it to the maintenance stage of a new behavior and always be able to maintain it without any struggle at all. And if any of my clients are watching this, love you guys. I believe in all of them, but I still coach them to anticipate a when of a lapse and not just an if. And this is not because I don't believe in them, but because it is so much harder. I've found that the more people beat themselves up when they fall off this proverbial wagon with the behavior that they've been trying to sustain or follow through with, that it's less likely they're going to get back up again and try this goal again, but in a different way, or try it again the same way, or whatever, because they're just that feeling of misery of I have failed. Again, it's easy to incorporate the goal into perception of self and say, oh, this failed because I failed. I am a failure, and like extrapolate that to identity again. But really what's happening is the experiment failed. Or like the fail safes of each coping strategy or specific mechanism failed. And if we hold on to that judgment, then it's going to make it difficult to emerge from this lapse part of the cycle and regain that sense of contemplation of wanting to begin the behavior again. And so this is why confidence and self-esteem is so important for effective goal setting and completion, because if we don't believe in ourselves and build that confidence to do the little things, and maybe this seems duh, but I think it's underrated in terms of trying to stimulate behavior change. Because if we're trying to just do these little things like recover from these lapses and get back on the horse and into the stages of change cycle, then how are we going to expect that we'll have confidence to do hard things like stop drinking alcohol if we've been drinking it for a decade, or I'm trying to give another good example, or like have difficult conversations with our partner or our family system, which we've never been able to have before. Like, those are high stakes risks. And the more that our brain perceives something to be a risk, it's going to be a struggle to motivate past that if we don't have that confidence in the background. So this kind of brings me to SMART goals, which some of you may have heard before. Most people have heard of this framework, especially in the workplace. But I've already kind of outlined the acronym over here to the right. But I think if you could take any letter in here and make it the most important, I would say that achievable, the A, is the most important. I work with clients. I find that they perceive when they perceive their goal as achievable, this is the greatest predictor of success in maintenance. I just got a notification that my internet is unstable. So I hope everybody can hear and see me still. Anyway, just wanted to say that real quick. So achievability being the most important of these letters that you could focus on for yourself. And I'll find that sometimes in a client or an individual's eagerness to make these goals and like see change and like get themselves going, that sometimes they'll make SMART goals that are still not smart enough. And sometimes I will kind of go so far as to restrict the goal that they've created to maximize the confidence they accrue in meeting it. Because like we talked about in the last slide, like if we fall off the horse and we're judging ourselves for doing so, it's going to take longer to get back on, or we might not get back at all, because we're kind of internalizing that sense of failure or shame that we couldn't do it. So it's really, really important when you're making these goals that they feel achievable as much as possible. And if you think they're achievable when you're like gung-ho ready to do it, to maybe like knock it down a peg for yourself, or tell a loved one like, hey, like this is my goal, and to have them be like, I know you and you really don't like to get up early in the morning, and so trying to do that 5 days a week, maybe you should like knock that down to 3 days a week. And so if you feel like you need additional insight outside of yourself in your motivated phase to make it more achievable long term, I would recommend that. So if you're doing this on your own, it might look like, I'll use weight as an example. I used to work on weight management research studies years and years ago, and so it just comes as the first example to mind. Let's say you're trying to lose weight and you're giving yourself 2 months to lose 10 pounds. And so if I hear that, regardless of the client's history with meeting goals or losing weight or anything like that, self-esteem, I'll probably right off the bat just be like, how about we do, 6.5 pounds in 2 months, or 10 pounds in 3 months, and like give a little bit more cushion space to this goal so it doesn't create quite as much pressure. And the way we're ensuring as much as possible that the goal is going to be achievable and boost that confidence, so that when we're working on smaller goals, then we have the confidence to start working on bigger goals. With those goals I mentioned before, like stopping to drink alcohol, or having difficult conversations with people we love, all those things that are really hard to do. And however, in the same breath, I will say that we have to make sure that the goal is not something that we're actively doing already, because then that's not helpful. Like we're already doing it and it's not something that we're looking to grow from. These are like growth oriented things that we're looking for. So they have to be pushed just outside of our window of tolerance. And when I say window of tolerance, I mean that place before you get so agitated or anxious that you shut down and can't continue, but also above your comfortable baseline. So we're not going to throw the window wide open and say, I've always been afraid of the water, but I think I'm going to learn how to swim. And I'm just going to go into the ocean, which is probably the hardest place to learn how to swim, and just start trying to keep myself above water. Like we're not going to do that. We're going to take a few steps back and try and make it again as achievable as possible. And all these other letters of the acronym are just areas that can help support you do that, to do that as best you can, by giving you something to measure that result by, making sure that that goal is coming from you and not from somebody else. Like, even if I'm trying to cut your goal down, I've had clients be like, nope, I can do that. And I'm like, okay. If we're using a scaling question, 0 to 10, 10, being the most, and I'm a 10, I can do this, I will let you, I'm not going to cut that goal down for you. You go do that. And anyway, so that's all. The rest of the letters are really just to support that achievable aspect. And so other things to keep in mind as you're working towards these SMART goals, as you're working towards harnessing your motivation, figuring out what stage of change you're in, allowing that to be what it is. I already kind of talked about the slow and steady, and this also may sound duh to some of you, but to do work on one goal at a time and not multiple, even if they're small goals that we're working on one at a time. Again, if we kind of fall off the wagon on one, is that going to affect the way that we stay on the wagon on the other one? And again, the name of the game, the aim is confidence. We're building confidence by moving slow and steady so that the pace picks up after the first few goals that you're feeling good about. As you've been seeing that change and you can do it consistently and you won't get thrown off by stress, that's when we start to up the ante, but only after we've been tested, only after we've formulated completely and as concretely as possible what that goal is, just outside the window of tolerance, but not too much. This is why it's so important to be slow and steady. And then we talked about self-monitoring, that insight of ourselves, that maybe I should knock it down a peg. Maybe I don't know what's causing these changes for things to be good or bad. And I did write in here that it is super, super, super important to pay attention to when things are going well. I have a client, sorry if they're listening to this and use you as an example. We were talking about making a change and to try and like compare, because I was like, okay, that's great that you know what it looks like when it goes wrong, but what does it look like when this thing that you're working on is going right? And she looked at me like I was speaking another language and was like, what do you mean when it's going right? And I'm like, well, think about this. Like, if we're, putting our pants on in the morning, we don't really think about which leg we're putting in first. We're just doing it. But if we start to notice, like, oh, I tend to be more comfortable putting my right leg in versus my left leg in. It's a silly example, I know. But it's showing you that there is intention behind the things that we're doing, no matter how small. Like it's like that crossing your arms example where people ask you to cross your arms the wrong way, the way you're not used to, like it feels odd. And so anyway, all that to say, to focus just as carefully on the positive things that are happening when things are going well, that'll allow you to be able to replicate them more often because you know exactly what's contributing to it. You know what it takes to reach the positive because you've built that awareness, just as much as when you're aware that things are negative. And the last word is a new vocabulary word that we haven't talked about yet, which is ambivalence. And so sometimes we want to change and we want to change really bad, but we find that we can't. And this usually means that there is some equal or greater mental force in opposition to the desire to change. And I do want to emphasize that this opposition is probably not rational. People that I've talked to, they get very upset at this irrational barrier to change. That's like, why can't I just get over this? This is silly. Like, why is this in my way? And as you're going through these processes of like formulating your goals, assessing like whether the experiment worked or didn't work, getting your motivation geared up and like that confidence in yourself as you meet small goal after small goal to check on, the only other thing you could do before checking on ambivalence is to look at, did I make this as achievable as possible for myself? And given my work situation, given my stress level, given my marital status, given if I'm a parent or not, or whatever the situation may be, I think that this was completely achievable and I should have been able to do it. Then that's when we check on this ambivalence. And I think of it like as this teetering scale of the example that I wrote for this slide was, this is really common. Ambivalence is really common to discuss in addiction work, I want to quit drinking or smoking, but it helps me cope with my stress better than anything else. So that's our tipping scale. Like, I want to quit, but it's the best way that I cope. And so why would I give that up? And so even if it's a maladaptive coping strategy, that's kind of relevant. Like, why would I throw out my best coping strategy with nothing else to take over, even though I know it's better for me, I should, blah, blah, blah. And so when we're checking on that ambivalence and giving that space to that concept, that other end of the scale, we can even switch that sentence and reframe it like we were practicing at the beginning. So imagine if I switch the order of that sentence, which will be oriented more towards change. So instead of, I want to quit drinking, smoking, but it helps me cope with my stress better than anything. Drinking and smoking helps me cope with my stress better than anything, but I want to quit. And I hope that you all can see how that lends itself more towards change versus staying stuck in the same pattern. And so the easiest way to practice that, if you're feeling stuck in ambivalence, these scales tilting one way or the other, like, oh, I want to do this, but it kind of makes me feel like that, or this is my barrier, but I know this is important to me, is to just put that thing that's important to you that you want to achieve at the end of your sentence and see how that makes you feel. And so I did include a couple of slides in here about applications for different demographic groups that I work with, instead of just individuals who experience depression, anxiety, burnout from work, addiction, things like that. And so applications for couples is kind of tricky. Motivation in couples work is tricky in general, because as I've found from my own experience, the emotion of an argument or a difficult time period strongly impacts motivation to stay in a relationship. That's probably not shocking to anyone listening to this. But the most important thing that I can share related to motivation and solution focused work with couples is acknowledging those changes made, however small. I'm going to go back to that slide where I was saying something that I say to my own clients is, a little change is better than nothing. Sharing these acknowledgements as partners, not just therapist client, but client's client in the relationship, usually is a source of invigoration for the partner to keep trying towards that change, and for the relationship, because like we mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, that solution focused approach generates more hope than the problem focused approach of, oh, well, this is the issue. It's like, yeah, it's the issue, but here are all the times that we were able to surmount like that. And I think it's funny, I talk with couples about how everyone wants to believe partners inherently know or expect each other's needs. And I wrote at the end of this slide that solution-focused thinking, strengths-based thinking is like quality assurance for your relationship. If your boss at work told you that you needed to figure out how to complete a certain task more efficiently, I imagine you would try to ask them, follow up how they envision you could accomplish that, or experiment with different techniques instead of trying the same thing over and over again. And I find that as a third-party observer, that couples get stuck when they can't recognize they're doing the same thing over and over again, and they get out of it when they can ask each other these like strengths-based questions, these solution-focused questions, and they get out of being stuck there and understanding how they've reached the point that they have. And these conversations do not happen in that hyper-emotional state of the general conflict. And so that's kind of what my applications for couples look like. And again, these checking in, gearing resolutions more towards preventing future conflict. Again, that quality assurance component, and not just, oh, we feel better now, like, let's move on. No, like, how can we prevent this in the future? What are both of us willing to commit to? How confident are we that we're going to be able to do that? And I also made a slide just for neurodivergent individuals. These are our individuals with ADHD or individuals with autism spectrum disorder. And it's super important, even more important than I've said up until this point for anybody else, that judgment plays a crucial role in the ability of a neurodivergent individual to feel motivated. Our society is not constructed to accommodate neurodivergent person. And as a result, those individuals typically carry a disproportionate burden of comorbid mental health conditions along with them throughout their life, like depression, anxiety. And so, coupled with the executive functioning capabilities lagging years behind the chronological age, also paired with these comorbid conditions, this leads clients to face significant frustration from authority figures, teachers, parents, bosses, and even partners. And the more that I find in my work with neurodivergent individuals that they can self-monitor and discover their own unique way to complete tasks and achieve goals, it's more likely that they will succeed without those neurotypical pressures weighing them down. Again, those shoulds, like I should do it this way because that's how everyone else is studying. I am wrong if I take certain number of breaks between me doing work because that's not how other people do it. But if that's how you have to do it, then do it. There's no, I will say there are some societal limitations that we need to work within often to succeed in our society, like being on time. And that's when that ability to experiment in our practice with solution-focused thinking becomes really important, because again, we've externalized the experiment from ourselves and our feelings about ourselves and our inherent failure or success. And that's how we can find those unique positions. I actually make the comparison often that there's a cookie cutter and individuals with ADHD autism are trying to stuff themselves into the cookie cutter, and in an attempt they lose a finger, or they slice their ear off, and that's a little graphic, but to exhibit the degree of pain that it causes to on a regular basis to try and crumple yourself into this cookie cutter, and to think about what it would be like to design your own that's roughly the same shape but has just enough room so that your ear and your finger and your toe don't get sliced off on your way of putting yourself into that shape. And so everything else on the slide, that typical negative and positive reinforcers might not help stimulate the motivation. That autonomy in this process is super important because, again, knowing how the interactions with neurodivergent individuals usually is with authority figures can make them feel more motivated to meet these goals and things that they're trying to strive for as a result. And so lastly, as we come to the end, you may have been bearing with me thinking all this time, wow, Jennifer, that's really cool that the solution focused thing is out here and that I can summon motivation if I have better self-esteem. But what if I've never been able to meet my goals before, or this particular goal, and I have really bad self-esteem? How am I supposed to engage in solution-focused thinking then? Because you're saying I need confidence and I need, this and that. And the answer to that is to look at motivation through a values-based lens. Again, for those people who are participating, familiar with ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, this is a key component of that. And so when we common values, I'll just give an example, are like stability, compassion, integrity, adventure. And when we're not living or making choices that are congruent with our identified values, those things that make us who we are, it feels like a rubber band that's stretched all the way to the ends and like feels like it's going to pop at any second and break. That tension we carry with us in our brain and our body, and it makes us extremely uncomfortable. And so as a result, if we're reflecting on the values, we're selecting the ones that apply. I actually do these exercises. There are worksheets online you can find that have a long list of values. It's usually like 40 to 60, like an incredible amount. Some of them seem like synonyms, to be honest. But to select those values that are most important to you right now, not in the past, not in the future, like your ideal values, but like right now, and how you're living towards those in the moment, or how you can make decisions and goals based around living towards those now. And sometimes as a result, when we're reflecting on these values, that can stimulate change and motivation in a way that extrinsic and intrinsic motivators cannot. So like an example would be if you're eating a favorite meal during a stressful week to motivate yourself to keep going, or like try and like give yourself a pick-me-up. Or if you're withholding a negative reinforcer, withholding time from a friend or a partner so that you can complete homework for the week or something like that. Those extrinsic and intrinsic motivators are not always enough to keep us going either long term or to like get us over the hump of that initial, I don't feel like I have confidence, I don't feel like I can reframe my thoughts. Then okay, we need to settle on some, what makes me again, like the very first example I gave in the PowerPoint, how did you get here from being depressed your whole life? How did you still wake up and get out of bed and do these things? And usually if we don't have the confidence, or we are struggling in another area that I mentioned, like externalizing our identity from our ability to follow through with goals, the answer is a values-based one. Well, I'm not lazy, so I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to work. Okay, you're ambitious, or you care about your work. Well, I can't let my family down because they rely on me. Okay, so you're family oriented, you're compassionate. And so those values can be examined to harness our motivation sometimes when we're lacking in other reinforcers at the moment. And so now I managed to run through that with a few minutes to spare. If you have questions you would like to hop on to ask out loud, any questions, like you can again still submit them through the chat. That's what I've got for today. And my question to all of you participating or watching this from home the next day, what is a SMART goal that you might craft for yourself, knowing what we've talked about today and trying to make that as achievable as possible. And this is some more information about me. I am currently not accepting new clients for the next few months, but we have our scheduling tool here, our number and text, and you can call our office. You can talk about ask about other therapists who use solution-focused techniques or motivation in their work, of which we have, and to schedule a consult with them, or perhaps to schedule an appointment with them. And thank you so much for joining me today. If there aren't any questions, I'll wait for a second. I just want to scanning how to train time. I'm just reading what's saying. Thank you, Kat. I like that comment. Anybody have any questions at all? Thank you. Aw. Of course. No, and that's part of the problem, is that demographic, the neurodivergent demographic, is not acknowledged to the degree that they should. You will get a copy of the recording emailed after today because you were registered for the call. So you will have a copy available. And it also will be posted on our website eventually under that resources tab on edenscounseling.com. What happens if you find you have a value you don't actually like? Ooh. Don't worry, I knew what you meant. The question is, what happens if you find you have a value you don't actually like? Then we can examine the potential for idealistic values. I did do that work with a client once. She presented the clients she did have, and she included a couple that were values to strive for. And so we did incorporate that into some of our work. So if you're finding one that you don't like, you can also use it as like oppositionally, like, oh, this is a value I don't want to incorporate, and to use that to motivate you to run the other way. Does that make sense? Like others' approval. Okay, cool. Glad that makes sense. I appreciate everyone's use of the chat box. Anybody else have any questions for me? Things that were confusing, nebulous, amorphous, ambiguous, all those really cool words? Okay, well, if nobody has any other questions, yes, Marcus says, don't forget to fill out the feedback form before you head out for the evening. Those of you who are with us today, and thank you again so much for joining. It was lovely to be with all of you.